After hurting you, what she hides most carefully is not confidence or indifference, but the quiet collapse of her inner identity. On the surface, she may appear composed, even relieved, as if removing you cost her nothing. But psychologically, something far more destabilizing is taking place. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we present to the world, and in narcissistic personalities, that mask is not an accessory, it is survival. You were not merely someone she loved or used, you were someone who helped stabilize that mask. When you were present, you reflected back an image of who she believed herself to be: desirable, important, powerful, admired. Your attention reinforced her constructed self. Once she hurt you and felt you pulling away, that reflection vanished. What remains is not strength, but disorientation. She is forced to confront a frightening question. She has avoided her entire life. Who am I when no one is mirroring me? That question creates anxiety, not growth, because growth requires honesty, and honesty threatens the false self. This is why her behavior after hurting you can seem so contradictory. One moment cold, the next reactive. One moment dismissive, the next strangely defensive. These are not signs of clarity. They are symptoms of fragmentation. The internal structure that depended on external validation has begun to wobble. She hides this instability behind pride, distraction, or replacement. But internally, there is confusion and quiet panic. And here is the deeper truth most people never realize. Your pain marked the moment her illusion cracked. Not because you were cruel, but because you became psychologically unavailable. When you stopped playing your role, the stage collapsed. So remember, this walking away did not make you weak or cruel. It made you conscious. And consciousness is the one thing a false self can never survive. What she hides next is far more unsettling than anger or regret. She hides her fear of being truly seen. Not seen in the flattering way she prefers, but seen psychologically. When you were close to her, you didn't just respond to her charm. You began to recognize her patterns. You noticed the contradictions, the emotional shifts, the moments where the mask slipped. And once that happens, something irreversible occurs in the narcissistic psyche. The illusion of control weakens. Carl Jung understood that being seen threatens the persona. The persona survives only as long as others accept it without question. When you started responding differently, less reactive, less compliant, more aware, she sensed danger. After hurting you, her fear is not that she lost you emotionally, but that you now hold a clear internal image of who she really is, and that image cannot be manipulated. This is why she may avoid you, dismiss you, or suddenly rewrite history. It is not indifference, it is defense. She fears that your clarity exposes her inner contradictions. To be seen means to be held psychologically accountable, and accountability feels annihilating to a false self. So she hides, she withdraws. Or she attacks your character, because discrediting the witness feels safer than confronting the truth. What makes this fear so intense is that you represent a living mirror she can no longer control. Others may admire her surface, but you saw beneath it. And once someone sees behind the curtain, the performance loses its power. This creates anxiety, because it reminds her that the persona is fragile. That exposure is always one moment away. For you, this matters deeply. It explains why your silence unsettled her more than your anger ever did. You no longer needed her narrative to define reality, and that is the shift that changes everything. So take this with you. When clarity replaces confusion, fear replaces control. Stay clear. Awareness is not just protection, it is liberation. What she hides even more carefully is the truth about how emotionally dependent she became on you. From the outside, she may project self-sufficiency, confidence, even superiority. But beneath that posture was a quiet reliance on your emotional presence. You regulated the atmosphere. You absorbed her tension, reassured her insecurities, and stabilized her inner world without ever being asked to do so explicitly. In Jungian terms, you carried what she could not integrate within herself. Narcissistic personalities often outsource emotional regulation. Rather than developing inner balance, they attach to someone who can hold it for them. You became that anchor. Your consistency, empathy, or even your willingness to explain and repair conflicts gave her a sense of psychological order. When she hurt you and you withdrew, that order vanished. What she hides now is not strength, but destabilization. This is why her reactions after the rupture can feel chaotic. Sudden mood swings, impulsive decisions, or frantic attempts to replace you are not signs of independence. They are signs of emotional withdrawal. Like someone cut off from a vital supply, she feels ungrounded. Jung would describe this as a collapse of projection. The qualities she placed onto you, calm, meaning, reassurance, return to her psyche as absence. And absence is uncomfortable when one has never learned to self-soothe. She will rarely admit this dependency, even to herself. To do so would shatter the image of autonomy she works so hard to maintain. So instead, she minimizes your role, rewrites the story, or convinces hers. LF, you were replaceable, but psychologically the loss is felt. The silence you leave behind is not empty, it is loud. For you, this realization is freeing. It reframes the relationship. You were not too much. You were carrying too much. So remember this when you stop regulating someone else. As emotions, you don't abandon them, you return responsibility to where it belongs. And that act is not cruelty. It is self-respect. What follows next is something she works tirelessly to avoid feeling, let alone revealing a growing sense of inner emptiness. After hurting you, she may appear distracted rather than distressed. She stays busy, seeks attention, surrounds herself with noise, or moves quickly toward new validation. But this activity is not fulfillment, it is avoidance. Jung observed that when the psyche lacks inner substance, it compensates with stimulation. What she hides is the hollow space that emerges when external affirmation can no longer mask internal absence. You once filled a psychological role that went far beyond companionship. Through your presence, conversation, and emotional engagement, you provided meaning. Meaning is not excitement, it is coherence. And when that coherence disappears, the mind does not immediately collapse, it drifts. This drifting is what she experiences as restlessness, boredom, or irritability. The emptiness is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, which makes it dangerous, because rather than confronting it, she chases intensity to drown T out. This is why new attention often feels strangely unsatisfying to her. It may flatter the ego, but it does not touch the deeper void. The persona is fed, but the self remains starved. Jung warned that when the inner world is neglected, it retaliates through anxiety and compulsive behavior. What she hides is not heartbreak, but a silent erosion of meaning. The realization that admiration cannot replace connection, and stimulation cannot replace substance. From the outside, it may look like she moved on easily. Internally, however, the absence you left becomes a mirror she cannot escape. Every distraction eventually ends. Every performance requires rest. And in those quiet moments, the emptiness speaks. For you, this understanding changes the narrative. Her apparent indifference was never proof of your insignificance. It was proof of her avoidance. So take this insight with you. When someone runs from emptiness, it is because they have never learned how to be alone with themselves. Choose depth over distraction. And you will never need to hide from your own inner life. What she rarely allows herself to acknowledge is that you were not just part of her life, you were a mirror. Not the flattering mirror she prefers, but a truthful one. Through you, she saw aspects of herself she could not fully control, her vulnerabilities, contradictions, and unmet needs. Carl Jung believed that meaningful relationships function as mirrors for the psyche, revealing both our light and our shadow. You fulfilled that role, and that is precisely why your absence is so unsettling. While others may reflect admiration or desire, you reflected coherence. You responded to her patterns rather than just her performance. Over time, this created something she both needed and feared: self-awareness. When she hurt you and the connection fractured, she lost more than emotional support. She lost a reliable reflection of herself. And without that mirror, the inner image begins to distort. This is why her behavior afterward may seem strangely exaggerated or performative. Without your grounded presence, she relies on shallow reflections from others who only see fragments. But fragmented mirrors create fragmented identities. Jung warned that without honest reflection, the ego inflates or collapses. What she hides is how disoriented she feels navigating herself without the clarity you once provided. She may tell herself you were replaceable, but psychologically, mirrors are not interchangeable. Anyone can admire the surface. Very few can reflect depth. Your ability to see her fully without illusion or worship was rare. Losing that forces her to confront either herself or distraction. And distraction is often the easier choice. For you, this insight reframes the loss. You were not valued only for what you gave, but for what you revealed. And that is why the bond felt intense. So remember this: when someone loses a mirror, they don't lose comfort, they lose clarity. Choose to be with those who can face themselves in your presence, not those who need you to stay blind. What she hides most deeply, and almost never admits even to herself, is the quiet regret of losing control over you. Not control in a dramatic or obvious sense, but psychological access. For a long time, she could predict your reactions, influence your emotions, and shape the narrative of the relationship. That sense of influence gave her stability. When she hurt you and you stopped responding in the same way, something fundamental shifted. The pattern broke. From a Jungian perspective, control is often a compensation for inner insecurity. When the inner world feels unstable, the ego seeks certainty outside itself. Your emotional availability once provided that certainty. But when you withdrew, not with rage, but with awareness, you disrupted the system. She could no longer provoke, soothe, or rewrite reality through you. What she hides is the shock of that loss. This is why your silence felt heavier to her than any argument. Silence means autonomy. It signals that you are no longer psychologically entangled. For someone who relies on relational control to maintain self-image, this feels like power slipping through the fingers. She may mask it with pride, dismissiveness, or the appearance of moving on, but beneath that is a sense of irreversibility. You cannot be pulled back into the old dynamic without your consent. What makes this realization painful for her is that control cannot be regained through charm or blame once awareness is present. Jung believed that consciousness, once achieved, cannot be undone. You saw the pattern. You stepped out of it. And in doing so, you reclaimed authorship over your inner life. For you, this is the closing of the circle. The regret she hides is the proof of your growth. You did not win by dominating, you won by detaching. So let this be the final truth you carry forward. When you take your power back, you don't need closure. Your freedom is the closure.